The microphone was still live, and my wife called me an employee. My name is Grant Mercer. I had spent 4 years directing safety for Hale Civic Works, and 3 years married to its chief executive, Vivienne Hale. During the televised opening of our Riverfront Operations Center, a reporter pointed at my platinum ring and asked whether the CEO had put her husband in charge of a city project. Vivienne looked at me, then at her father beside the cameras. "Mr. Mercer is just an employee," she said. I removed my wedding ring and set it beside her microphone. The small click carried through every speaker in the hall. Vivienne's hand froze above the podium. Behind her, the company logo filled a screen 2 stories high. Beside it, a live broadcast counter continued climbing as if nothing in the room had changed. I did not make a speech. A ring already said everything useful. "Grant," she spoke my name away from the microphone. I stepped back from the stage. Adrian Hale, Vivienne's father and the chair of our board, moved into my path. He was 64, silver-haired, and trained by 30 years of public contracts to make control look like good posture. "Stay until the briefing ends," he said quietly. "Walking out makes the question worse. Then answer it honestly." The reporters had stopped pretending not to listen. I walked around him and down the side stairs. 70 technicians, electricians, dispatchers, and field supervisors were waiting to move into a building that coordinated flood barriers, emergency pumps, and road crews across the Eastern District. If the systems failed, neighborhoods flooded. My job was to make sure nobody's surname mattered more than a shutdown procedure. Lewis Trent met me at the operations room door. Lewis was my deputy safety director, a patient 42-year-old engineer who had trained beside me for 18 months and had authority to run every checklist when I was absent. "Do I ask about the ring or the 3 alarms on my screen?" he said. "The alarms have useful answers." "Good, I hate jewelry." The dry remark kept me from looking back at the stage. We entered the control room. 2 alarms were test sensors still set to commissioning mode. The third came from a loading bay door that had not seated correctly. Lewis assigned the first 2. I took the third with a field technician and watched the steel latch engage after a simple alignment. That was the cruel advantage of mechanical problems. They admitted what they were. 10 minutes later, the wall screens showed green across the site. Through the glass, I saw Vivienne end the press conference early. She did not smile or try to explain the ring. She said the company would issue a complete statement after reviewing the question, then left the podium with my ring still beside the microphone. My phone vibrated before I reached the next inspection station. The message came from Mara Quinn, the city's independent ethics officer. I knew her from 2 previous bid reviews, but she had never needed to examine my marriage. "Mr. Mercer, do not delete or alter employment, reporting, compensation, or disclosure records. Hale Civic Works has 48 hours to provide the city with its conflict file. The contract recommendation is paused pending review." The 5-year operations contract was worth more than revenue. It kept 212 field employees assigned through winter. Losing it would not bankrupt the Hale family. It would empty workshops belonging to people who had never stood near that microphone. Lewis read my face. "City." I handed him the phone. He read the message once and returned it. "Do you report directly to Vivienne?" "On the current chart, yes." "Does the city know you're married?" "Human Resources does." The board was supposed to approve an independent reporting line before the bid. "Supposed to." That is the word people use when a deadline survives longer than a promise. Lewis leaned against the desk. "What do you need from me?" It would have been easy to tell him to say nothing. That was how the problem had grown. Every private decision had been defended as temporary. "Run the remaining readiness checks under your own authorization," I said. "Copy the city inspector and the audit committee. Do not route them through me or Vivienne. You're stepping away from approvals connected to the contract, not from keeping the doors safe." He nodded without trying to make the choice sound noble. By noon, the broadcast clip had escaped every boundary the communications team tried to build around it. The most replayed version ended with my ring striking the podium. Some captions called me a rejected employee. Others called me a secret husband. None knew that our marriage had begun in a clerk's office with 2 witnesses, and a written plan to disclose it after Vivienne's first year as CEO. That year had become 3. Vivienne found me in the equipment corridor shortly after the building closed to visitors. Her ivory suit was still immaculate, but she had removed the microphone pin from her lapel. She held my ring inside her closed hand. "Lewis says the site is ready," she said. "Lewis is right." Mara Quinn froze the contract review. She told me. Vivienne opened her hand. The ring lay across her palm, warmer in color than her skin under the corridor lights. "Put it back on," she said. "That is not an answer to what happened." Her fingers closed again. My father received a call 10 minutes before the briefing. Someone at the city had found a vendor list that identified you as my spouse. He said confirming it before council reviewed the file could be treated as an undisclosed conflict. "So you denied it." "I tried to keep the contract from collapsing on live television." "You kept the sentence short. The collapse was efficient." Pain crossed her face, then discipline covered it. Vivienne had spent her adult life learning that visible emotion became family evidence against her. I had once admired that control. Lately, I had helped maintain it. "I should have ended the briefing," she said. "I should not have said what I said. You did not call me a safety director. You did not say the question required review. You looked at Adrian and erased our marriage. For 12 seconds. No, on camera for 12 seconds. We have been doing the private version for 3 years." The corridor door opened. Adrian entered with our general counsel, then stopped when he saw Vivienne's fist around my ring. "The board meets at 6, he said. "Until then, neither of you speaks publicly. Grant, you will remain off contract decisions. Vivienne, counsel has prepared a neutral statement." "Does it say he is my husband?" she asked. Adrian's expression barely moved. "It says personal matters do not affect company governance." "Then it is not neutral. It is another refusal to answer." He glanced at me. "One gesture has already endangered 200 jobs." "The gesture came after the lie," I said. "The city will care about the conflict, not your feelings." Vivienne stepped between us, not dramatically, but enough to change who Adrian had to face. "The city will receive the full file after council reviews it, before the 48-hour deadline." For the first time that day, Adrian looked uncertain. I understood why when Vivienne turned to me. "Our original disclosure plan is in the home safe," she said. "We review it together tonight. Nothing goes to the board until we know exactly what we promised and which of us broke it." "Both of us," I said. She absorbed that without argument. At 6, she went upstairs to face the board. I remained in the operations center while Lewis completed the final test cycle. The city's 48-hour clock glowed on my phone. My ring remained in Vivienne's pocket. For the first time since we married, neither of us could call secrecy temporary. Vivienne arrived at our townhouse at 9:14 that night. I noticed the time because our kitchen clock ran 2 minutes fast, and she usually corrected it whenever she came home stressed. This time she walked past without touching it. We had rented the townhouse under both names. It stood 20 minutes from Hale headquarters and looked nothing like the limestone family residence where Vivienne had grown up. The furniture was ours. The mortgage we had discussed was not. Every permanent decision had waited behind one more board vote. She placed my ring on the kitchen table. I set the safe file beside it. The first page was dated 4 months before our marriage. It named Vivienne Hale as Chief Operating Officer and Grant Mercer as Director of Safety Systems. The plan required written disclosure to Human Resources, the Audit Committee, and every public client whose contract placed me under her authority. It also required an independent director to approve my compensation and performance reviews. Both our signatures were at the bottom. Human Resources received it, Vivienne said. "I found their acknowledgement in the archive. The Audit Committee did not. My father said the committee would review it after the CEO transition." And after the transition, she turned to the second page. "I asked for the reporting change twice. You asked Adrian. He was board chair. Elaine Park chairs the Audit Committee. She never saw this. Elaine was an independent director, 55, and known inside the company for reading footnotes before introductions. If the plan had reached her, the reporting line would not have remained a family promise. Vivienne pressed 2 fingers against the paper. I believed my father when he said the timing would make the city think I had promoted you because we were married. I held this job before our first date. I know the city does not, because we let the company hide the chronology. The word we mattered. I could have kept the entire accusation pointed at her. It would also have been false. I had accepted every delay. I had allowed our anniversary dinners to happen in private rooms. I had attended company galas through staff entrances because it was easier than watching Vivienne calculate who might see us arrive together. When she promised the next quarterly review would fix the structure, I had answered with patience until patience became consent. "Why did you put the ring down today?" she asked. "Because you said the private arrangement out loud in its ugliest form. You could have challenged me at home. We have challenged it at home. Home was the only place our marriage was permitted to be true." She looked at the ring. "Do you want a divorce? I want to know whether you can say husband without first checking who owns the microphone." That answer hurt her more than yes would have. It also left me exposed. Vivienne opened the board packet from her meeting. The board had placed me on paid administrative leave from contract decisions. She had been removed from the city presentation team pending review. Elaine Park had demanded the full conflict file and scheduled an audit committee meeting for the next afternoon. Adrian objected, I asked. He said Elaine was turning a communications error into a governance spectacle. What did Elaine say? That governance becomes spectacle when people wait for cameras to notice it. I almost smiled. Elaine had a gift for making a complete sentence sound like a closed door. Vivienne slid another document from the packet. It was a proposed public statement. The company regretted confusion regarding my personal association with the chief executive. It said I had failed to disclose that association through the appropriate board channel. Personal association, I read. 3 years of marriage reduced to 2 words and a disciplinary problem. I refused to sign it. Good. That does not repair what I did. No. We sat with the clean discomfort of agreement. My phone lit with a message from Northline Safety Consortium. Their hiring director wanted to confirm my final interview at noon the following day. Vivienne saw the sender before I turned the screen over. What is Northline interviewing you for? There was no version of the truth that made my timing honorable. Regional assessment lead. When did you apply? 2 weeks ago. Before today. Yes. She leaned back. You were preparing to leave the company. I was preparing to stop reporting to my wife in a company that would not admit she was my wife. And you did not tell me. I wanted an actual option before starting another conversation that ended with after the contract. Vivienne closed the board packet. You hate being hidden, so you hid your exit. Yes. My answer removed the defense she expected and left the damage intact. The doorbell rang at 9:47. Adrian stood outside alone. He carried a slim gray folder and the expression he used when he believed private pressure would save everyone from public choice. Vivienne did not invite him in. I need 10 minutes with Grant, he said. Anything concerning his employment concerns the audit. This concerns a graceful separation. Grant not your husband. Vivienne heard it too. I stepped onto the porch and closed the door behind me. Adrian opened the folder. The company would pay 18 months of salary, continue my benefits, and issue a statement praising my service. In return, I would resign and acknowledge that I had not completed the board disclosure process. You have the signed plan, I said. A plan is not board approval. Your signature appears on the routing note. Acknowledging receipt is not approval. Then the audit can decide what it means. His jaw tightened. If the contract fails, field workers will lose assignments. You can protect them by removing the conflict now. You are asking me to protect them with a false confession. I am asking you to recognize that marriage to a chief executive creates consequences. Only for the spouse without a board vote. Adrian closed the folder. Vivienne has carried this company since her brother left. Do not punish her because she made one answer under pressure. I am not the person who taught her pressure excuses dishonesty. He stared at me, and for one brief second I saw the father beneath the chairmanship. He loved his daughter. He also believed love granted him permission to manage every cost around her. "The offer expires at noon tomorrow," he said. "Then it will expire unopened." I returned the folder. Inside, Vivienne stood where I had left her. She did not ask what Adrian offered. She asked whether I had accepted. "No. Would you have told me if you had?" The Northline message remained face down on the table. "Yesterday I would have told myself I needed certainty first," I said. "Tonight I do not know." She nodded once. "That is at least an honest answer." We emailed the original disclosure plan and human resources acknowledgement to Elaine and Mara Quinn before midnight. We included Adrian's routing note, the unsigned public statement, and notice of his severance offer. I also disclosed the Northline application because an outside employer bidding on city assessment work could create another conflict if hidden. At 12:20, Mara confirmed receipt. Her reply identified her role and scope precisely. She would determine whether Hale Civic Works had disclosed the marriage, whether the reporting structure violated city rules, and whether anyone had attempted to influence evidence or testimony. She would not decide our marriage, my resignation, or the company's guilt by headline. The first interviews would begin at 8:30. Vivienne picked up my ring and held it toward me again. I closed her fingers around it. "Keep it safe," I said. "Do not use it as an answer." She went to the guest room. I remained at the kitchen table with the disclosure plan, the Northline interview, and the clock neither of us had corrected. Mara Quinn began the ethics interview by moving the wedding ring away from the center of the table. Vivienne had placed it there when we entered the audit room at Hale headquarters. Mara was 48, with close-cut dark hair and a habit of aligning every folder before she opened it. She had authority from the city to pause the contract recommendation, request records, and refer false statements for further review. She did not have authority to turn our marriage into evidence by symbolism. "The ring establishes that you are married," she said. "The records establish whether the company handled that fact honestly." Vivienne slipped it back into her pocket. Elaine Park sat beside Mara as chair of the board audit committee. Adrian had been asked to wait outside until his separate interview. For once, his absence did not feel like safety. It felt like a space in which our own decisions could no longer hide behind his. Mara started with dates. Vivienne and I married on October 12th, 3 years earlier. Human Resources acknowledged our disclosure plan on October 15th. Adrian's office received it on October 17th. The audit committee never received it. The company submitted its first city conflict questionnaire 6 months later and marked no relevant family reporting relationship. "Who completed that answer?" Mara asked. "Legal prepared it," Vivienne said. "I signed the certification page." "Did you read the full questionnaire?" "Yes." "Then why did you sign?" Vivienne did not look at Adrian's empty chair. "My father said the marriage was personal until the reporting change became formal. I accepted that distinction because I wanted the bid to proceed." "Did Mr. Mercer ask you to correct it?" "He asked when the structure would change. He did not see the questionnaire." "Why not?" "I was responsible for safety submissions, not corporate disclosures. That answers access. It does not answer whether you wanted to know." I wanted Vivienne to solve it without forcing me to make the conflict explicit. The next record was a compensation waiver I had signed the previous year. It allowed Adrian, rather than Vivienne, to approve my salary while the audit structure remained pending. I had treated it as proof that the company was trying. Mara treated it as proof that everyone knew a conflict existed. "Temporary until what date?" she asked. There was no date. "Then it was not a control," she said. "It was an indefinite exception." At 10, Louis Trent joined the interview. Mara introduced his relevance before asking a question. As Deputy Safety Director, he could confirm whether my role had been created for me, whether I controlled information needed for certification, and whether removing me would endanger the project. "Grant hired me after an open technical panel," Louis said. "He built the readiness system, but every procedure has a second signatory. I can complete certification with the team." "Did he ever use his relationship with Ms. Hale to override you?" Louis glanced at me. No, he mostly used it to avoid being seen leaving the office at the same time as his wife. Can you operate safely if he is removed today? Mara asked. Safely, yes. Comfortably, no. Those are different standards. The answer protected the workers without making me indispensable. I had trained him for that reason. Hearing it still felt like a door closing. During the break, payroll director sent Vivienne an estimate of the cost if the 5-year contract failed. 46 temporary field assignments would end within 8 weeks. Overtime would disappear first. Permanent layoffs were not immediate, but winter maintenance would shrink. Vivienne called the finance committee and requested release of the project reserve to guarantee 12 weeks of base pay for affected staff. Elaine required her to put the request in writing and abstain from the vote, because the decision could make her look personally generous during an investigation. Agreed, Vivienne said. She did not offer to write a private check. The company had created the risk. The company needed to carry the first cost under visible approval. My Northline interview began from an unused conference room at noon. The hiring director, Susan Bell, stated her authority and concern before discussing the role. Northline performed independent safety assessments for several regional agencies. If I joined, I could not work on any Hale project for at least 1 year. Are you leaving because of yesterday's broadcast? She asked. I applied before it. Why? My reporting line had become professionally indefensible, and I had failed to force a decision. Does your wife know about this interview? She does now. Susan did not praise the answer. She scheduled no next step until the city review established whether I had participated in a false disclosure. When I returned to the audit room, Adrian was in the witness chair. Elaine had allowed us to observe because his statements concerned our plan. He admitted receiving it. He said he had believed forwarding it during Vivienne's CEO transition would create the appearance that she was rearranging governance to benefit her husband. He intended to send it after the first contract cycle. The company has pursued city work for 3 cycles, Elaine said. Each cycle made disclosure more damaging. That is how concealment compounds, Mara replied. Adrian's severance offer lay open before him. He described it as an attempt to remove the conflict quickly and preserve jobs. Why did the statement require Mr. Mercer to accept sole responsibility? Mara asked. Because he signed the employee code. So did the CEO. So did you. Adrian looked toward Vivienne. A chief executive cannot survive every family mistake becoming a company admission. Vivienne's answer was quiet. Then the company should not have used family authority to manage the mistake. At 3, Mara issued an interim finding. The marriage had been disclosed to Human Resources and the board chair, so Grant Mercer had not secretly entered the company as the CEO's husband. But the company had failed to create the independent reporting structure promised in its own plan. Vivienne had signed inaccurate city questionnaires. Adrian had withheld the plan from the audit committee. I had continued accepting the arrangement while quietly preparing to leave. The city gave us 72 hours to complete safety certification under Lewis's authority. It also gave the board 48 hours to establish a lawful reporting structure. If I remained an employee under Vivienne's executive control, the contract recommendation stayed frozen. I can recuse from all decisions involving Grant, Vivienne said. Elaine shook her head. Recusal cannot make the CEO absent from the company. He needs an independent employer or an independent board reporting line. Then I will report to the audit committee. That could work, Mara said, if it is real, permanent, and approved before the deadline. Vivienne looked at me, as if the solution had finally arrived. I should have felt relieved. Instead, I heard myself say, Northline may offer me a position. You would rather leave? She asked. I would rather know my professional independence does not depend on your board remembering a promise. We can build the structure now, because cameras found the marriage. Vivienne's voice hardened. You demanded change, and now that change is possible, you are treating departure as the more honest choice. I applied because change was never possible until it became expensive for you. Elaine closed her folder. This decision belongs outside the audit room. The governance decision does not. She scheduled a board vote for the following evening. Lewis would lead certification. Vivienne would prepare a public correction. I would provide a written choice. independent board reporting or departure after a safe handover. In the elevator, Vivienne kept her hands at her sides. "Were you ever going to tell me about Northline if they rejected you?" she asked. "I do not know. That is becoming your most honest answer." The elevator opened. She walked toward her office. I went toward the control center. Between us, 48 hours remained, and neither the marriage nor the contract could return to what it had been the day before. Vivienne returned to the same podium 30 hours after she called me just an employee. This time the operations hall was closed to guests. Reporters stood behind a marked line. The city ethics office watched remotely, and Elaine Park sat where Adrian had stood during the opening. Vivienne wore a dark aubergine suit instead of ivory. There was no family logo behind her, only the company name and the date. My wedding ring lay in her pocket. I watched from the control room balcony with Lewis and the certification team. "Yesterday I gave a false answer to a direct question," she said. "Grant Mercer is Hale Civic Works safety director. He is also my husband. Our marriage was disclosed to Human Resources and the board chair 3 years ago. The company failed to establish the independent reporting structure that disclosure required, and I signed city forms that did not identify the conflict. I am responsible for those signatures and for the answer I gave on this stage." No music followed. No employee had been arranged behind her as proof of loyalty. She announced that she had recused herself from the city contract process. Elaine and the audit committee would supervise the response. Vivienne would continue ordinary operations as CEO, but she would not approve my pay, duties, evaluation, or future employment. Adrian would not direct public communications during the review. A reporter asked whether I had threatened to leave her if she did not make the correction. "No," Vivienne said. "My husband did not create my obligation to tell the truth." Another asked whether the ring video had been staged. Her expression did not change. "If it had been staged, I would have requested better lighting." The restrained answer sounded like her, not a press release. A few reporters laughed, and the pressure in the room shifted without disappearing. Adrian entered through the rear doors midway through the questions. Elaine met him before he reached the stage. I could not hear their exchange, but he stopped beside the press line rather than crossing it. Vivienne did not look toward him for approval. When the briefing ended, she left the microphone where it stood. She did not bring out my ring. Lewis tapped the certification schedule against the railing, ready to become temporarily irrelevant. "I have trained you for this moment. That explains the excessive documentation." We began the final safety cycle at noon. Lewis held the authority. I remained available as technical support, answered questions, and signed nothing. The arrangement showed me how often good leadership becomes confused with being the final hand on every page. The first exercise simulated a pump station power loss. Lewis ordered the transfer. Field Supervisor Rosa Vale verified load. The backup bus engaged 4 seconds inside the city standard. The second exercise closed 2 floodgates under conflicting sensor data. The team isolated the faulty reading without my intervention. During the third exercise, a door alarm repeated the fault we had corrected on opening day. Lewis stopped the clock rather than wave it through. He found a warped mounting plate, replaced it, and reran the sequence. "That delay costs us 12 minutes, a project manager said. "A flooded service corridor costs more," Lewis replied. I wrote nothing on his evaluation. I simply watched the system work without requiring my authority. At 3, Adrian asked me to meet him in the empty visitor gallery. Elaine joined us and identified why she was present. As audit chair, she would witness any employment or governance discussion during the review. Adrian did not thank her. "Vivienne's correction has created a second news cycle," he said. "The council opposition is calling the company dishonest." "The first statement was dishonest," Elaine replied. "Correction does not erase consequence. It establishes whether we can respond to consequence." He turned to me. "If you choose the audit reporting line, I will support it." 2 days earlier, That offer would have sounded like victory. Now I heard the condition beneath it. My independence would still depend on a family chair choosing to support a structure he had already ignored. The board should decide without a private promise from you, I said. You believe leaving proves integrity. No, leaving may prove I waited too long to solve my part. Adrian's anger softened into something more tired. Vivienne has lost control of the contract because she corrected one sentence. She lost control because the company hid 3 years of decisions. And your ring made it public. My ring made it visible. Elaine ended the meeting before we could repeat ourselves. She gave me until 8 that evening to choose between the independent reporting line and a managed departure after certification. At 5, Northline called. Susan Bell said the consortium would offer me regional assessment lead if the city found I had not falsified disclosures. I would be barred from Hale work for a year, report to an independent technical board, and take a 12% salary cut during probation. Vivienne and I had shared household costs privately even while the company pretended we shared nothing. Leaving meant separate insurance, separate travel, and no guarantee the marriage survived the distance I was creating. Staying offered more money, familiar work, and a reporting line the audit committee could make lawful. It also kept every professional disagreement inside the same building as my wife's office. I found Vivienne at home before the board vote. She stood in the kitchen with 2 plates on the counter and had corrected the clock. Northline offered, I said. She turned off the stove. Do you want it? I want the independence. That was not my question. I sat across from her. The work is smaller than what I do here. The salary is lower. I will spend 3 nights a month traveling. I also will not need my wife's audit committee to prove I earned my job. Vivienne removed her own wedding ring. For one instant, I thought she was answering my opening gesture with another public wound. Instead, she placed her ring beside mine on the kitchen table. I have worn this for 3 years in rooms where I asked you to hide yours under a glove, inside a pocket, or beneath a table, she said. I am not taking it off because I want the marriage to end. I am taking it off because I do not want either ring used to force an answer before we have one. The 2 bands rested without touching. If I leave Hale, I may leave us too, I said. If you stay only to protect us, you will blame me every time Adrian enters a room. And if I leave without trying the structure, then I will wonder whether the job application was your real decision, and the microphone simply made it easier. Neither choice allowed me to remain innocent. I accepted Northline's conditional offer, effective after certification and a 30-day handover. I sent the decision to Elaine, Mara, and Louis before the board met. I did not ask Vivienne to approve it. She read the email on her phone. You gave Louis full authority through the handover. Yes, and the city receives every test record. Directly. She nodded. CEO first, wife second. At 7, the board convened. Elaine proposed an independent compliance officer, permanent audit control over executive family employment, and removal of Adrian's authority over public statements while the review continued. Vivienne supported the motion and abstained from every clause concerning me. Adrian voted against it. The motion passed 6-2. At 9:20, Louis sent the third cycle report. All critical systems had passed. The replaced door plate was documented rather than hidden to preserve a perfect score. The city inspector scheduled the final observation for morning. Vivienne and I ate dinner with both rings between us. We discussed the test results, the handover, and the board vote. We did not discuss putting the rings back on. Honesty had corrected the public record. It had not yet decided whether our private life could survive it. The city inspector arrived at 7 the next morning with Mara Quinn and no television crew. His name was Daniel Cho, and Mara introduced him before the test began as the licensed engineer authorized to accept or reject the operations center's final safety certification. He had never worked for Hale Civic Works, had no authority over the ethics review, and cared more about failure logs than family statements. Lewis led him through the control room. I stood behind the marked observer line. The team repeated every critical sequence: backup power, floodgate isolation, emergency dispatch, loading bay containment, and manual evacuation. Daniel selected 2 tests at random and changed the order without warning. Lewis adjusted without looking toward me. At 11:40, Daniel signed the certification. He noted the replaced door plate as evidence that the team had reported and corrected a fault rather than chasing a flawless presentation. The workers did not cheer until he left the room. Then somebody struck a wrench against a metal rail, and the entire floor answered with applause. Lewis found me beside the shutdown board. "You can stop pretending you are not proud. I am evaluating the improper use of tool as percussion instruments. Put it in my first independent review." Elaine writes that now. He held out his hand. "Then I will enjoy disappointing a new person." We shook. The handover no longer felt like abandonment. It felt like a system doing what it had been built to do. Certification solved only one part of the city's decision. At 2, Mara issued her final ethics report. She found no evidence that I had been hired or promoted because of my marriage. My role, salary history, and technical evaluations predated Vivienne's promotion to CEO. She also found that Hale Civic Works had filed inaccurate conflict questionnaires, failed to activate its own safeguards, and attempted to obtain a misleading resignation statement from me after the issue became public. The company would not receive the 5-year contract recommendation. Instead, Mara offered the council a narrower path: a 12-month trial agreement under independent monitoring. The city could end it after any undisclosed family intervention or material safety failure. The reduced term cut projected revenue almost in half, but it preserved the field assignments through winter and forced the company to earn any extension. Vivienne accepted the recommendation before Adrian could argue for an appeal. "A shorter, honest contract is worth more than a longer one built on an exception," she told the board. Adrian looked older than he had on opening day. The review had not revealed theft, bribery, or a hidden rival. It had revealed something harder for him to dismiss: a sequence of reasonable-looking choices that protected his authority until the cost reached everyone else. Elaine's governance motion became permanent. Adrian remained a director but lost the chairmanship and all communications authority. Elaine would serve as interim chair for 6 months while an outside search began. Executive relatives could work for the company only under audit committee supervision and public client disclosure. Adrian asked to speak with Vivienne and me after the vote. We met in the same visitor gallery where he had offered to support my reporting line. "I believed I was protecting the company and my daughter," he said. Vivienne did not rescue him from the sentence. "You protected my title by making my marriage disposable." He looked at me. "The severance statement was wrong." "Yes, I am sorry. It was a direct apology, not a complete repair. You will communicate with me through Elaine during my handover," I said. "You will not ask Vivienne to carry private messages into my employment." His first instinct was visible resistance. Then he nodded. Vivienne set her own boundary. "You do not enter our home without invitation, and you do not discuss my marriage as a company asset or threat." "Understood." He left without asking whether the rings were back on our hands. The council approved the trial contract 3 days later, on the scheduled 6th day, by a vote of 5-2. There was no triumphant music and no instant restoration of trust. Finance released the project reserve under audit approval, protecting base pay until trial revenue began. Lewis became acting safety director. I remained for 4 weeks to transfer vendor contacts, incident histories, and training records. The reserve changed real decisions. Field Supervisor Rosa Vale kept 12 winter technicians on rotation instead of releasing them after certification. Finance published the weekly balance to Elaine's committee, so employees could see how long the protection lasted. Nobody had to thank Vivienne personally for money already governed by company rules. Northline confirmed my start date. The salary reduction required choices. Vivienne and I canceled the mortgage application we had never completed. We separated our joint household account into fixed contributions for the townhouse through the end of the lease. Neither used the arrangement as proof that divorce was inevitable or impossible. We also met Dr. Helen Ward, a licensed marriage counselor recommended through an employee service neither Hale nor Northline controlled. At our first session, she established her role before asking about the rings. She would help us examine decisions and communication. She would not decide whether we stayed married. The 2 rings remained in a small wooden box on our kitchen shelf. Who decided to hide the marriage? Helen asked. We both agreed at first, Vivienne said. Who decided to keep hiding it? Vivienne and I answered at the same time. We did. That was true, but incomplete. Vivienne had benefited more from the arrangement. I had absorbed more of its visible cost. I had also used silent endurance as evidence of moral superiority while preparing a departure she could not answer. Helen asked us to define separation without using it as punishment. Vivienne moved into a rented apartment 6 blocks away. We kept 1 scheduled dinner each week and 1 counseling session. Company matters stayed out of private dinners unless an immediate legal duty required disclosure. Northline matters stayed out too. We agreed that either person could ask a direct question and receive a direct answer, even when the answer was, I have not decided. On my final day at Hale, Lewis gathered the safety team in the control room. There were no cameras. He gave me the replaced door plate mounted on a plain piece of wood. A reminder that perfection is suspicious, he said. You stole that from my training manual. I improved the wording. Vivienne waited outside the room after everyone left. She had kept her distance during the handover, honoring the reporting boundary even when it made us look colder than we were. Elaine approved Lewis's permanent appointment, she said. He earned it. So did you. Different job. She glanced at the mounted plate. Very elegant. It will dominate Northline's regional office. They may reconsider the offer. The small exchange was the first easy moment between us in weeks. It did not erase the microphone. It showed that not every conversation had to stand trial beneath it. At the front entrance, our paths separated. My car was in the employee lot. Vivienne's was near the executive gate. Dinner Thursday, she asked. 7. Public restaurant. Yes. She waited, understanding why the detail mattered. Reservation under both names, she said. I nodded and walked to my car without a ring on my hand. This time leaving the company was not leaving in secret. Whether I returned to the marriage would depend on choices neither of us could delegate. 4 months after the live broadcast, my name appeared on a public project notice without Vivienne's beside it. Northline had assigned me to assess emergency systems in 3 neighboring counties. The work was narrower than directing an entire department and more honest about what it required. I inspected, reported, and left decisions to people whose marriages I did not need to disclose. Hale Civic Works completed the first quarter of its trial contract without a safety failure. Lewis reported to Elaine's audit committee on contract matters and to Vivienne on ordinary operations. The arrangement was not decorative. Elaine rejected 1 staffing request, required 2 additional field audits, and published the company's family employment policy before Adrian had finished objecting to its tone. Vivienne remained CEO because the board concluded that accountability did not require replacing every person who admitted failure. It required limits, oversight, and changed conduct. She sold none of her responsibility to a resignation speech. Adrian stayed on the board as 1 director among 8. He no longer approved public statements or entered Vivienne's office without an appointment. His relationship with us was careful and limited. Sometimes consequence looks less like exile than the absence of automatic access. The marriage changed more slowly. Vivienne and I kept our Thursday dinners. At first we chose restaurants with tables far enough apart that no conversation could become content. The reservation carried both names. She arrived through the front door. I did not check whether anyone recognized her. We talked about ordinary things before difficult ones. Her apartment radiator clicked all night. Northline's coffee could remove paint. My mother, Nora, had joined a community electrical workshop and was teaching teenagers how not to fear fuse boxes. Nora knew about the separation because I told her, not because a clip found her. She was 62, retired after 35 years as an electrician, and possessed no board authority, secret record, or interest in becoming our judge. "Do you still love her?" she asked when I visited. "Yes." "Does she still hide you?" "No." "Do you still hide the door before you use it?" The question was less elegant than anything Helen asked, and just as accurate. At counseling, I admitted that I had treated private preparation as safer than direct conflict. I had applied to Northline because I feared Vivienne would ask me to wait again. By not telling her, I ensured she could not answer differently. Vivienne admitted that she had confused carrying pressure with controlling its distribution. She believed she could protect the company, Adrian, the city bid, and our marriage if she decided which truth belonged in which room. The microphone proved that people do not remain separate categories because an executive prefers clean folders. We wrote boundaries in plain language. No one in either family could direct our employment, statements, housing, or finances. Neither spouse would accept a role reporting to the other. A job application that could change our home life would be discussed before the final interview. Temporary decisions needed an end date and a named person responsible for review. Public privacy meant declining detail, not denying the relationship. The boundaries did not sound romantic. That was one reason I trusted them. At the end of the 4th month, our townhouse lease required a decision. Vivienne came over on a Saturday morning with coffee and the wooden ring box. She set both on the kitchen table where we had once reviewed the disclosure plan. "I do not want to renew the townhouse alone," she said. "Neither do I." That answer has two meanings. I mean, I do not want this house to become a museum for the version of us that hid here. She sat across from me. "Do you want to live together again?" "Yes, not here and not immediately." "What does immediately mean?" She was enforcing our own rule. "We choose a place together within 60 days. Equal lease. Commutes that do not make one career the default. We continue counseling for 6 months after moving." Vivienne considered each term. No Hale property. No Northline housing allowance. One room neither of us calls an office before asking. "Agreed." She opened the wooden box. My brushed platinum band lay beside her narrower matching ring. "I have wanted to put this back on you every Thursday," she said. "Why didn't you?" Because wanting the picture back was not the same as rebuilding what it meant. I picked up her ring but did not slide it onto her finger yet. "Are we choosing the marriage or avoiding the divorce?" "Choosing it. With dates, reporting lines, irritating direct questions, and whatever Northline calls coffee. Industrial solvent." Her mouth curved. "That too." We returned the rings together. No camera recorded it. No company received value from it. The platinum band felt unfamiliar for several minutes, then simply present. We found an apartment halfway between our offices with 2 equal commutes and a kitchen clock that kept accurate time. Vivienne moved in first by 6 hours because her movers were efficient. She labeled one unopened box personal, then crossed out the word and wrote Vivienne. I wrote Grant on mine. Neither box needed a corporate category. The final city review occurred 2 months later at the Riverfront Operations Center. Northline had been assigned to verify the trial contract independently, but conflict rules barred me from evaluating Hale's work. I attended only as regional assessment lead to explain the consortium's monitoring process. Lewis presented the safety record. Vivienne presented company operations. Elaine presented governance compliance. The council extended the trial contract for another year rather than restoring the original 5-year award. Hale Civic Works would continue earning trust in measured pieces. Field assignments remained funded. The independent monitoring stayed. After the vote, reporters gathered near the same podium used at the opening. The microphone had been replaced, but the small circular mark left by my ring was still visible in the polished wood if you knew where to look. A reporter recognized me and asked Vivienne, "Is Mr. Mercer representing Hale Civic Works today?" She did not look toward Elaine, Adrian, or a communications advisor. "No," she said. "Grant Mercer is Northline's regional assessment lead. He is here under an independent city assignment." The reporter glanced at our hands. "And he is your husband." Vivienne looked at me before answering, not for permission to tell the truth, but because the truth included both of us. "Yes," she said, "he is my husband. Those are separate facts and both matter." The microphone carried every word. Another reporter tried to ask whether our marriage had influenced the contract extension. I stepped forward only after Mara, who was observing the review, identified me as the proper Northline representative for process questions. "The extension followed published safety and governance conditions," I said. "My firm's work excludes any hail assessment assigned to me. The records are available through the city." No one applauded. They wrote down the answer. That was enough. When the questions ended, Vivienne and I walked through the operations hall together. Lewis remained at the control board with his team. Adrian stood near the rear doors, spoke briefly with Elaine, and left without approaching us. The system's wall showed green across the district. At the podium, Vivienne touched the faint circle in the wood. "Do you regret putting it there?" she asked. "I regret that it was necessary." "That is not the same answer." "No," I covered her hand with mine. Both rings remained visible. "I do not regret refusing the lie." She nodded. "Neither do I." We left by the front entrance. Outside, the river barriers moved through their scheduled test, while workers recorded the result under their own names. The first time my ring touched that microphone, it marked the moment our private compromise became a public wound. The last time we stood beside it, no gesture was required. My wife said my name. I answered in my own role, and neither of us disappeared inside the other.